All right, welcome to the American Shoulder and Elbows podcast. I'm your co-host, Brian Waterman, a sports and shoulder surgeon at Wake Forest. I'm fortunate to have Peter Chalmers, a shoulder and elbow surgeon at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, as my co-host today. Peter, welcome to San Diego.
Oh, thanks. I'm very excited to be here.
Before we get started, I should mention that the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons, the University of Utah, Wake Forest University, or any of the institutions of our guests. And we're honored today to have two guests live and in person as we embark on a special episode on site commemorating the 42-year history of the San Diego Shoulder Course. First, we'd like to welcome Jon Ticker, a shoulder and sports surgeon specialist at Orland and Cohen in New York. Jon is a man of the people, so I'd like to toot his horn a little bit. He has been past chair of the ASES Foundation and has produced the 25th anniversary book for the ASES in 2007. He has received the ASES Foundations Award and has been a longtime contributor to the San Diego Shoulder Course, currently serving as chair of San Diego Shoulder Institute. Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Brian. And Peter, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Next, we have a man that needs no introduction, John J.P. Warner. His track record in innovation is unparalleled. Dr. Warner is co-chief of the Mass General Shoulder Service, where he has been since 1998. He's past president of ASES in 2012 and has been a long-standing champion of both value and quality. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Warner.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. How did you first get involved with the San Diego Shoulder Course, Dr. Warner?
It's so many years ago, it's hard to remember. It's certainly decades, feels like 3 decades. Jim Esch approached me and asked me if I'd come to the meeting. So like most of the younger folks that are presenting here, I was one of them one day a long time ago. And that grew in relationship where he asked me then to join the board and then to play a role in developing the meeting. And here we are today.
What about you, Jon?
Sort of similar from Jim. He approached me around 2013 and said, we'd love to have you come to San Diego. I remember my first talk was on first-time dislocators. The topic hadn't been yet resolved, if it even is now. And then having trained with JP 20 years before, there was a good overlap there. And then also was welcomed on the board a couple of years ago. And it's been my honor and pleasure to be here and participate. It's been a great meeting, and the content is always amazing.
So it sounds like you've both been involved for a long time now, which is amazing. Tell us, JP, what's like some of your favorite memories from over the years? Like when you look back over all the SDSIs you've been to, what are some of the things you look back and think, wow, that was really special?
I don't think there's any question that the main thing that I remember of all these meetings are the relationships that I've built. It's the people that you meet. It's not just what happens in the meeting, but what happens outside the meeting. And the conversations we have scale and are expanded outside the meeting and lead to all sorts of directions that are, I think, very creative. We raise questions, and the questions need answers, and hence we build content for the next meetings. So that would be a very important one. I think realizing that this is the oldest shoulder meeting in the world that I'm aware of, and being part of that is just a great feeling every time I come here. And to be fair, this is a passion project and a commitment I made to a man who I really love, and that's Jim Esch, who is a unique individual. We talk about innovators, but nobody that I can think of has innovated in education more than Jim Esch. And that's probably the most important thing here. I mean, it's the purpose for being here.
Yeah, for me, see, on a granular level, there's techniques that I've learned here that I use, that I practice. So I've improved in my professional life and my clinical practice. And as JP said, on the big picture, the relationships with other faculty, but also with industry, have made me better, at what I do. And it does come back to Jim Esch. He's been a motivator for all of us. If you've had time to spend with him, you realize that one of the innovations in our field of shoulder, and this is something JP and I have published on, is shoulder education. And if that's one of the innovations, then he's right up there on the people who have put that forward.
You all have done such a great job of really encompassing several different subspecialties. You've really threaded a needle through arthroscopy, sports medicine, trauma, and so many other things. And I'm just curious how have you done that effectively? Because it wasn't always so collectively organized. Oftentimes we were very siloed.
I think it was the realization that the world was not just arthroscopy. Now, most innovation, at least at that time, seemed to be by people that were inclined to innovate. The Snyders, the Burkharts, folks like that were really moving the specialty forward. There are many others like Lonnie Johnson, etc. And so that's the direction we went with. Shoulder arthroplasty was in its nascent period. It was just evolving. As this became more and more clear that people who did shoulder surgery had to have multiple skill sets, we scaled according to the needs, and we listened to the people who were participating in the meeting and what they asked for. And so the meeting became more reflective of the scope and scale of what they do every day.
Anything to add, Jon?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my training at Columbia, when I was a resident and being able to work with, Dr. Neer, Dr. Bigliani, Dr. Flato, those individuals who were innovating and adapting to changes in the field really helped me evolve in that way, and this course has reflected those changes.
Over 42 years, there's, I'm sure, a ton that's happened in this meeting. What do you think have been some of the largest impacts that the meeting has had upon the field or the community in general?
I think several important points. Number one is this meeting has always had a close relationship with industry. And industry, I'm sorry to my academic colleagues out there, academics does research. Innovation generally happens using the elements of research, but it doesn't generally happen in academics, sorry. And the people that are most innovative make a connection with industry. And industry has been very engaged and involved in, and they're necessary for our education because the new techniques and technology that come from industry are what drive what move the needle, what drive things forward. And so that would probably be a good point that I can make. I'll let Jon add something else.
It's interesting because there are people who will come year after year. The same individual will come every year to expand their knowledge base in shoulder. There was one guy that had come 30 years in a row. That's impressive. That's a commitment to learning your craft and knowing that this is the course that could provide that. And our attendees, in addition to our faculty, have been national but also international. And then one other thing that Buddy Savoie started in 2016 was the ASES Fellows Day. That has been a huge component and contributor and has enhanced the meeting because of that aspect.
I can think of on my just brief memories all the different mind-blown scenarios that I've encountered when I've been here. Acromial osteotomy, the snooker ball, alternative bearing surfaces. There have been so many things that I've heard here first. And this course has continued to evolve significantly over time, from changing out the lab, different locations. Maybe we can talk a little briefly about what next steps look like for the San Diego Shoulder course.
So let me just highlight that point you just made, and that is that we have always focused on giving the basics, maybe at a little bit higher level, but then pushing the envelope. And the people we want here are people who are actually thinking about the questions and need answers and looking for those solutions. That requires some, willingness to understand that maybe there's something better than what you're doing. But that differentiated this meeting for many, many, many years. The next part is hard to say because there are a lot of challenges out there that are financial and otherwise within the context of orthopedics and strategy for industry. But I think a big move now has been digital technology and its role, including AI in arthroscopy and arthroplasty, etc. And I think bringing this to an audience of open-minded surgeons is going to help them adapt to what's coming in the future, inclusive of financial models, economics of what we do, which we've largely ignored, which I think is very, very important. You can get it elsewhere, but it would be great to put it in context of the care we deliver to our shoulder patients.
I'll just take one small example of what you brought up, Brian, remplissage. That Eugene Wolfe was a staple at this meeting. And we now are employing his technique that he published decades ago in variations. But he was one of the first people to bring it. It came to this meeting early when he was routinely on the faculty. And just like you've noted, that's something that I learned and picked up and have evolved with. That's just one example. of what the San Diego Shoulder course has meant, at least to me.
Well, it's great to hear both of your thoughts and memories. Yeah, but I think it's a great course, and it's great to be involved. I mean, I think it's a real accomplishment of Jim Esch's that it's gone on for so long. I mean, that's really the amazing thing, is that year after year, as you mentioned, people come back because the course continues to reinvent itself with new content. It's not just the same thing recycled.
Definitely agree with that.
Parting words of wisdom to attendees at this meeting or in future meetings. Dr. Warren?
I think that I've been fortunate in my career to witness the explosive growth of shoulder care and potential that we have to improve the lives of individuals where 10 years ago we couldn't do so many of the things we can now do. Keep an open mind, look for the perimeter of what you know in order to scale your knowledge and to become better in caring for your patients. And I think this meeting and others like it are the places you need to go in order to be able to find this. You will find it on places like ViewMedi, etc. But that's usually after it's been presented at places like this and vetted with argument and debate, and etc., which is really the essence of evolving new ideas.
I'll summarize it. Just there's a Charles Mayo quote from 1927, and I'm going to modify it slightly. The best thing is for a patient to be in the hands of someone who's a teacher of medicine. And to be a teacher of medicine, you must always be a student. And that's over 100 years ago. And I think all of us at the table realize that you've got to continue to learn to be the best teacher. And this course has helped me.
Let me share one more piece of wisdom that comes from E. Emery Codman, the father of value-based healthcare. And actually, Codman was an innovator. He said, "Show me something different, for there's a chance of it being better." This is a place you can see that's something different, and that's been the history of the San Diego Shoulder Institute.
Such a great landing point. You know, we both owe you a debt of gratitude for your service, both to Jim Esch and his ongoing legacy, but your just commitment to improvement of our community. We're so thankful to have you here in this room and to be present, fully present today. On behalf of Peter and I, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Yeah, thank you. It was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now that we've had that amazing introduction to what the San Diego Shoulder Course is and what its history is from JP and from Jon Ticker, we are truly honored here now to welcome two real giants in the field of shoulder surgery. So we are just truly honored to welcome San Diego legend Jim Esch. He's the founder and CEO of the San Diego Shoulder Institute, and in classical naval aviator fashion, we have anointed him with the call sign Genesis. Dr. Esch, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So he founded the course in 1983, and he has just a true passion for education and a drive for excellence, and that's really been contagious across this meeting for many decades now. He's inspired generations of orthopedic surgeons to provide innovative and technically advanced care, and each year he builds on the attributes of the previous course to construct an improved annual program. We heard that from JP and from Jon Ticker about how there's really been an evolution. Every year people come back because it's new. Not to be outdone, Steve Snyder is our other guest here. One of the founding 5 members of the Southern California Orthopedic Institute in 1981, Dr. Snyder has been a long-standing contributor to the field of shoulder arthroscopy. He's pioneered much of what we now know as standard, and he's been a prolific educator. He's invented over 50 surgical products. Dr. Snyder, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Well, we have truly a lot to tackle with you two. You're both are pioneers in the field, and we're very honored to have you here. But my understanding is there actually was originally that you two were part of the three, just 2 of the 3 amigos. Tell us about the third amigo.
Oh my gosh, that is a story that would go on for 100 years. We call him the big amigo, Big Steve Burkhart. Yeah, we call him the big amigo. It's Steve Burkhart from San Antonio, Texas. And Jim and I have been working on the course since 1983, 4, somewhere like that. And it started with Dr. Esch's effort to diffuse information about shoulder arthroscopy, since really nobody in the country was expert in that field. He was in San Diego, and Jim and I met in England. I had no idea who he was, and I was nobody. I was in Los Angeles area, little place called Van Nuys, north of Los Angeles. And yeah, I met Dr. Esch, and he was all excited because he'd started a shoulder meeting just for arthroscopy in 1983, and he was having a second meeting in 1984, and I was just up the freeway a bit, so he invited me to come down. There were two things memorable about that meeting. One of them was that I had never really done arthroscopic surgery on a cadaver that was in a basin. So we had the shoulder cadavers in a big bowl, and we were supposed to operate on them there. And the second thing was that there was a red tide, and I took my windsurfer down on the top of my minivan, and I fastened it down with some bungee cords. And if I went over 30 miles an hour, the windsurfer would fly off. So those are the two memorable things. We didn't do a lot of good shoulder arthroscopy then, but we got a group of people together. I shouldn't say we, because Jim did, and put together the course with his guidance and direction that now has lasted, 43 years. And it was probably the number one thing I did during my education on shoulder arthroscopy to learn and teach and be able to spread and share ideas about shoulder arthroscopy. So I blame him for the disease I caught back then, that little spark of virus that made me so interested in shoulder arthroscopy.
Dr. Esch, we recently had the third Three Amigo, Big Steve. We had him on the podcast, and it was just such a pleasure. A lot of his story is his comeuppance in the shoulder world, and often against adversity. All three of you have done such incredible work within the field of education. I'm curious if you can give us your perspective on what you saw on the landscape and how you developed the San Diego shoulder course. And how did it even come to be?
So I practiced in Oceanside, California, and I bought my first arthroscope in 1976, started scoping knees, and we had a small group of local surgeons, about 6 guys, and we met about once or twice a year, sometimes 3 times, and shared videos in a hotel room of knee scopes. And at the same time, I visited Lanny Johnson probably every 6 months for 5 or 6 times, because he was the guru of teaching. And I would always bring a nurse with me, because I would say, I want my OR to be just like Lanny's. And the precise way he put instruments on the back table and so forth. So and Lanny scoped the shoulder one day, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. So after a while, I scoped the shoulder, and fortunately, I debrided somebody who had a SLAP 3 lesion and cured him. And he was actually a vice cop at Oceanside. Went back to work 3 weeks later. Probably the best result I've ever had. So out of this, I started this meeting of people interested in the shoulder, and we were, as Tony Robio called us, scope jockeys. The Shoulder and Elbow Society didn't have much use for us, and so we just began looking in the shoulder, trying to figure out what the labrum was and all these things that we didn't see before. And then I started looking for bright people like Steve Snyder and others who could teach me. And that's how I met Harvard Ellman, Pascal Below, J.P. Warner, all these individuals of the shoulder. And then we just started, this was the first meeting that the registrants were allowed to scope cadavers, because I was a volunteer and originally a hand surgeon at the UCSD anatomy course. And then it was actually the anatomy for medical students. And they wanted to reach out, so we had access to the cadavers. And the meeting has always been in June, because that was the only time the medical school would let us access their cadavers. And then the meeting in 1984 and the subsequent meeting, people registered, and we just sent a little notice out, and 120 people signed up, and the room only held 100. So then the fire marshal came by and kicked out 10% of the chairs down to 100. Fortunately, he left, and then an hour later, somebody from the hotel asked how they could help me, and I said, well, maybe you could put some chairs back in the room. And so that was kind of there was an enthusiasm for the shoulder. And initially, we just debrided things, just like we did early on in the knee. And then eventually we moved into instability, and that was very popular at the beginning. And I lived in a town of old people, so I saw a lot of rotator cuff tears, and then eventually repaired one of those with Lanny staple. And the nice thing about Lanny staple is it protruded a little bit, so you went back at 3 months and took it out, and lo and behold, you would see that the rotator cuff had healed over. And so that was amazing.
Let me follow up on that. You know, you were definitely ahead of your time in creating a comprehensive shoulder course, not just arthroscopy, but looking at trauma, you know, shoulder reconstruction, other things, aspects of early sports medicine. How did you thread the needle with those factions, the open shoulder surgeons and the arthroscopists,
Well,
the dark arts, as they've been known, right?
the first part was the arthroplasty people, and Dr. Below and Dr. Gilles Walsh from France were very helpful to me. Actually, I tried to take Dr. Rockwood's arthroplasty course, but he wouldn't let me into it because I wasn't one of his fellows, especially when it became the reverse shoulder. And so we moved into arthroplasty, and it was the French that came over, and then they did cadaver demonstrations of how to expose the shoulder, and that was amazing. I remember Dr. Walsh did a cadaver demonstration, and also Dr. Below, and they always brought their own retractors. And so it became amazing how much you could see, because we could see expose the glenoid. Before that, most Americans just did hemiarthroplasties because they didn't know how to expose the glenoid in that area. And then trauma just grew out of that, and mainly was fixation with plates and screws, and then moved into arthroplasty. And the early on, many of the traditional arthroscopic surgeons were not enthusiastic about having the arthroplasty guys here. And the arthroplasty surgeons didn't like the arthroscopy surgeons. And I had a private practice, so I did some arthroplasty, and then eventually I did a reverse total shoulder, and I was amazed at the results. And then I remember before I ever did a reverse, I visited Anders Eklund in Stockholm, Sweden. Anders had just finished his 222nd case. And before I even, and actually when I visited him, he just said, well, scrub in. They have different rules in Sweden than we do in the United States.
We recently had Anders on the podcast, and he shared with us some of the early history of working with Grammont, which was just amazing to hear, because it's in a lot of ways not that long ago and has just totally taken arthroplasty by storm.
Yes. And to this, just before I retired, a woman came back to me who had a rotator cuff tear, and I was interviewing her, and I didn't remember doing the first surgery. And she said, I need a reverse shoulder, just like my other side. And I'm thinking to myself, your other side's too good. She could lift her arm 180 degrees, and I was just blown away. And she had a medium to large tear on the other side that I would want to fix arthroscopically. And I remember, even though I looked at her incision, I had to get an x-ray in my office to convince myself that what I was seeing was actually a reverse shoulder. So I think the reversed arthroplasty has changed the approach to shoulder surgery. And initially there was a lot of discussion of how big a rotator cuff tear you had to have before you did a reverse shoulder. Now almost everybody's getting a reverse. And there's some argument among Big Steve and others that maybe people are doing reverses because they don't know how to repair rotator cuffs. So I think that discussion is going to go on, and maybe will sort itself out in the next 10 years.
Well, Dr. Snyder, that's a perfect segue to you. You know, you have had a love and a commitment to the instruction of arthroscopic skills, you know, and I think your legacy in that realm is really legendary. You had a hand in developing the Alex model, and I've heard from several of your trainees, they truly have learned to master the dry lab and not tying in so many of these fundamentals before transitioning to live patients. I'm curious if you could talk to us about how you developed this approach.
Yeah, you know, I don't know why. I think some people, and I was infected again with that enthusiasm for teaching. And I learned early on in medical school that if you're the leader of the group, you learn more by getting information from the people in the group. And you call that teaching, but in fact you're learning. And I spent a lot of time in medical school and internship and in residency, just pumping people for ideas. And you know, I'm not the brightest tack in the box, but I can learn with repetitive education. So I was always got a kick out of being a teacher. And the thing that got me, the way to explain it is, if you have a young person, man or woman, who's really interested in the subject, and you watch them, and you watch their enthusiasm, and then you see a little sparkle in their eye, and you know they got it. And when they've got it, you've done your job and you've hooked them. And so when we started our group back in 1981, the group being SCOE.
A little small group in Southern California.
Well, it started with 5 of us. And the 5 of us were equal partners. But one of us, myself, hadn't done a fellowship. Everybody else had done a fellowship, and Jim Fox was the leader, and he was an absolute magician when it came to arthroscopy of the knee, but nobody cared about the shoulder. And I'd subluxed both shoulders in football when I was young, and figured that that was actually a pretty important joint. Even though I'd torn both ACLs as well. I thought, you know, we've got enough knee surgeons. And I asked the group, do you mind if I just do shoulders? And they were thrilled, because that gave them all the knees, and they didn't care about the shoulder. So out of 5 SCOE surgeons, I was the shoulder guy. And then I met Jim and saw his enthusiasm and that spark in his eye. And it was just a marriage made in heaven. And Steve Burkhart came along a couple years later. Long story, but brilliant biomechanics guy. So there were the three of us, and we had this fellowship. We had a fellowship from the day I started in practice. That was part of the genesis of our SCOE group, was to teach. And we always had cadavers available. We had a hospital that was willing to help, but more importantly, we had people in industry. Now the question, I get back to, I tend to talk in big circles, but the question was about the ALEX models. And trying to teach using cadaver materials, and we had lots of people coming to visit us. We couldn't afford it, and it was just too expensive. So I met a guy named Denzel Miller, who had started a company called Sawbones under the heading of Pacific Research in Vashon, Washington, which was a little island just off Seattle. And Denzel was enthusiastic, but he didn't have any money. So I went on a fundraising tour to all the different companies involved. And at the time it was Smith & Nephew, Linvatec. Arthrex was just barely coming out of their shell. And DJ Ortho, Donjoy. And I squeezed them for some money, and we got $40,000, and a lot of money in those days, 1983 or 4. And I said, I'm going to make a shoulder model so that we can have bigger labs and train more people just on the basics of triangulation, stitches, anchors, the things that were coming along. And so we got this money, gave it to Sawbones, and they produced this wonderful model called Alex the Shoulder Professor. Now, why Alex? Well, I had the pleasure, and still do, of meeting and knowing this wonderful guy from Italy, Alex Castagna. And Alex came over as a resident, and he kept coming over to visit. And Alex would tape and video the surgeries we were doing, and he'd stay in a little hotel room across the street from the office, and he'd come over in the morning, watch surgery, work on his stuff. And so he was one of the first guys to test the model, and he's a real handsome guy, bald-headed and just big Roman nose. Just a wonderful guy. And so we took his picture, and I made a decal. I was doing some Photoshop in those days, and I insisted that Sawbones put his decal of this handsome Italian with the words Alex the Shoulder Professor on every model. And that's why it got the name. And it made Alex immediately recognizable throughout Europe, because he and with that model, it trained the early arthroscopists. We used it for Anna, we used it for the Esch meeting, it was the mainstay in shoulder education, especially for those people who didn't have a university to supply cadavers. And so when the Arthroscopy Association got going, and we got Michelle Johnson, and Jim actually was a contact with her, she was able to do the cadavers along with Nancy and the team Jim put together. But the shoulder model was the bridge. It's still useful nowadays, but it's fallen back some, because now all of the big arthroscopic companies have access to shoulder cadavers, again, based on Jim's early work with them. And but the shoulder model was that bridge, and it gave us the ability to triangulate, to, while looking at a screen. And that was the thing that got us going.
I went to visit Alex Castagna as part of the European Traveling Fellowship, and he told that story from his side, not of the Alex shoulder model. I hadn't heard that part. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But about visiting you and how much he learned from you and how important that was to his own development of his skills. One of the things that I love about that story, and was brought up earlier by JP, is how important the relationships he developed at this meeting have been in his, in his professional career. One of the things that I really respect watching the two of you and talking to Steve Burkhart also about his own history is the relationships you've developed. And, in an increasing impersonal world with email and text, sometimes we suffer the loss of the in-person touch. Tell us a little bit, what have the relationships you developed here meant to you? Like, what is the friendship you have together, what has it meant to you?
Oh, it means everything. They become my best friends around the world. And one note to young doctors, I visited a number of these surgeons before I knew them very well, and around the world, and said, Dr. Blow, can I come visit you? Dr. Gerber, can I visit you? Dr. Rockwood, can I visit you? And they all said yes. Mm-hmm. And so I learned more by visiting people in the operating room and watching how they did things. And one thing I was thinking of as Dr. Snyder was talking, the early arthroscopy of the San Diego course was technical on how to do things, how to tie knots, how to pass suture, and Dr. Snyder and Dr. Burkhart developed wonderful tools to help us. And then the next thing was the students wanted to use cadavers, so I spent most of my time telling them that maybe they could work on a model just as well, and that's been difficult. And then the next thing is, when you're running a course, is your customer is really the students that pay money to come to the course. And often the physician, the teacher, just wants to see his name in lights. So there's a conflict between the teacher's egos and the student's ego. And it was my opinion that the reason to have a course was to teach the students how to do things. And now that the technical skills have hit probably a transient plateau, we don't have any fancy glue yet. We're looking for what I call the go juice to make cuff seal. Maybe can't face up to the fact that maybe some of them aren't going to heal. And now we have to deal with the patients that we operate on and how we interact with them. And that's a difficult thing for many surgeons to grasp. And so we're now teaching the student when to repair the rotator cuff, when to repair a big cuff, when you should use a physical therapy, when you should just use a reverse total shoulder. It's kind of anathema to the arthroscopic cowboys that came out. So I think that's the next generation of teaching, is how do we teach the people who come to teach interact with their customer that is the patient.
And do you have any thoughts on that? What do you think that vehicle looks like? Is it augmented reality, or are there other scenarios that you see we can innovate to better facilitate that exchange of knowledge?
Probably teaching with models, with patient models, because patients come to see you. Initially, patients came to me, said, I want my opinion on fixing my rotator cuff. And I would say, well, I would do it arthroscopically, but Dr. Jones down the street does mini opens, and the results, in my opinion, were the same at that time. Well, the patient would say, thank you, but they wanted me to fix their rotator cuff. So the patient comes to you with a preconceived idea of what they plan to do, but they don't tell you their whole story. They just kind of dangle it out there. They talk like they found your name in the phone book, or some of my best referrals were from a hairdresser in town who happened to tell her patients I was a good doctor. So, it was a very interesting trying to figure out where patients come from. But the patients have a certain belief, so I think you have to ask them what they expect. They may say, well, I was expecting to have my cuff repaired. Oh, I just thought I needed a shot of cortisone. I just thought I needed physical therapy. So I would tend to do whatever the patient wanted, and maybe I would say, well, I'll give you a shot of the cortisone. I think you need some therapy, and maybe they don't like therapy. I say, well, you need to learn to do some exercises, or maybe you're going to need your rotator cuff fixed surgically. So I try to lay out with the patient at their initial visit their algorithm of treatment, and then we'll just try A. If that didn't work, go to B. And the patient is kind of involved in that decision making. Or just say, I only have 10 minutes with you according to your health plan, and you need your rotator cuff fixed, and otherwise just hit the road. So you have to develop the care of the patient.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is patients come to you, they used to come to you because of your reputation in town and so forth. Now they come to you because of their insurance company or various reasons, and there's a lot of pressures on the physician on how he spends his time with the patient.
Dr. Snyder, what innovations are you most excited about that are on the horizon?
Oh. Well, at the risk of being commercial, and you can certainly cut this out if you want, but I've been interested in innovation for the whole 42 and a half years of my practice, even way before. As an intern and a medical student, I had some stuff that I thought was pretty cool, but I have been blessed with opportunities, and the opportunities, I think everybody gets opportunities, but I think the lucky people are those who have the forethought to act on them. And I was beset with a bad back, 2 bad knees, bad wrist, 2 bad shoulders from just previous sporting trauma, and had some total joints and whatnot. And I got to the point after 43 years of standing, bending over at the waist, and my back went bad. So I needed to retire, and I needed to get my joints fixed. So I did, and the next day, the day I retired, I got a phone call from a company that was a startup that had an idea and wanted some consultation on. And I was full of consultation. And the idea was to take the technology that Steve Jobs and these smart guys have developed for iPhones and make it into an arthroscope. And those ideas were miniature video chips and LED lights. And we know what happened with the SLR cameras. Jim was a big photography nut, owned all these multi-$1,000 cameras with big lenses and whatnot. And I bought one of the earliest iPhones. And I was amazed of the pictures, even the quality back then. This company was offering me the opportunity to be in the forefront of the development of a new type of arthroscope. And in the day it was called the Gattiloscope, named after Mike Gattilis, who first had the spark of an idea of a new scope. His idea was not LEDs and microchips. His idea was a scope that had an ability to have a flexible or adjustable angle on the tip. But that idea was picked up by a company back in New Hampshire called DECA, D-E-K-A, named after Dean Kamen, who was probably the most brilliant inventor in the field of medical devices at the time. And I was invited back to New Hampshire to discuss this idea with his engineers and some of the founding members, and Mike Gattilis was there as well. And they hired me to be a consultant. I was still working at the time, but when I retired, they offered me the job of chief medical officer and I was thrilled because I could work off my computer discussing this with brilliant engineers, brilliant technicians, AI guys. AI was just being developed. And we worked together and just in the last few months have launched this scope, which is single-use, pre-sterilized, cloud-based, so there's no need for recorders and things like that. Everything is high-tech, just like an iPhone, and very inexpensive compared to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we invest in. I don't mean to make this an advertisement, and you can certainly cut it out, but I'm thrilled about it because it gave me a direction for the last 3 years of my life. And now this is available commercially and will change the future of arthroscopy, all endoscopy, laparoscopic surgery, ENT surgery, bladder surgery, every kind of endoscopy that uses light and visualization will be, the cost will be cut nearly in half because there's no reprocessing, there's no servicing, everything is done by the scope in the box. You open it up, you use it, and you discard it. And so I'm excited about that. That's the future. We've got enough anchors. We've got all kinds of biologics. Donnie Buford and his guys have explored and continue to improve on the biologics. That's extremely important to help healing. But now we're able to see in an inexpensive way and completely eliminate very important but yet troublesome areas of scope management. So that's what I'm going to do till the day I fade away.
Yeah, Dr. Esch, please.
So I think we need all the tools and all the repairs, but and we've had a camera looking at it, initially black and white, and on these modern disposable cameras that Dr. Snyder just talked about. So, but if I look back at areas, we looked at labrums and we removed labrums, and then we started reattaching labrums, and then we, after 20 years, realized there's bone loss there, even though it was looking at us all the time, and the whole approach to instability now is dealing with bone loss that we never even saw. We were too busy putting anchors in the bone where the bone was missing. And then we come into the rotator cuff, And we've learned how to repair it and do slides. Big Steve has really showed me how to do slides and get it to repair. But then, since then, it seems like we got everything known to mankind to try to make the cuff heal, but it doesn't seem like it wants to heal. So maybe we need to talk to the cuff about its biology and find out, why it's not healing, or maybe we just can't influence the biology and need to do something else. And then there's weird things. There's posterior instability of the shoulder. So we've been tightening up the capsule and doing all these things to the labrum of the capsule. And then Dr. Gerber is telling us, well, maybe the problem is in the acromion. And what's the acromion have to do, and an acromion osteotomy have to do with treating posterior instability? So maybe we're looking in the wrong place for some of our solutions. And then we have patients interacting with their environment, whether it's in sports, playing tennis, or just walking across the room and falling down, and how we take care of the patient. What's the patient's goals? I was in a great generation which watched Dr. Charnley come along with a total hip, and you got a new hip just to help you walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And now somebody comes in and wants 2 new hips so they can play 18 holes of golf and carry their bag. And so they have different demands. So I think the whole area of the shoulder, we're now approaching in shoulder education. But part of me wonders if we're looking in the wrong place for the answer. And the other problem is we're dealing with a patient, so every surgeon may have his little deal, or speaker has his deal on what he would like to develop. But the students and the registrants who come to these courses want to learn how to apply this to their practice. So there's often, I think as an educator running a course, you have to listen to what the shoulder surgeon wants and how they can make themselves a better surgeon.
Well, certainly that's always been the tension in our field, that ultimately we must do what's right for the patient, but to innovate we must work with industry, and industry has their own priorities, and certainly to educate we must teach at meetings, and then there's obviously these competing influences between the teacher who wants to be famous and the industry who wants to make money and the student who really just wants to learn how to take care of their patient. And we certainly, one of the things that I think I admire about you is that you've walked that balance with this meeting in a way that's really been so enduring and durable. One of the questions I wanted to ask both of you is, we've asked a lot of people that have been guests on the podcast over the years. You guys have you've experienced a lot of things in this world. I want to ask you, if you could have dinner with any person in all of history, who would you have dinner with? But maybe more importantly, where would you have dinner?
I'd like to have dinner with Socrates.
Oh, that's a good choice.
He was always asking a question, and he would say, well, you may be the best shoulder surgeon at Athens, but you can't run the city. And so often our egos get carried away with what we can do. So I think Socrates sort of tried to say, well, you may be the best inventor, Dr. Snyder, but you can't run Athens, or you may be running the best shoulder course, Dr. Esch, but we have problems with the Athens Police Department, and somehow you can't solve it.
Where would you have dinner with Socrates?
Oh, I'm not a big food guy, so I'd probably go to Popeyes with him.
That's the best combination. What about you, Dr. Snyder?
Well, I did.
Popeyes is already taken.
Yeah.
No. Actually, there's nobody in the world, in my small world, that I admire more than Dr. Esch and Dr. Burkhardt. And so everywhere I go in the world, seems like they're there with me or I'm there with them. And we have dinner. We had dinner last night. We had dinner a little while ago in Arizona. We have dinner in Sun Valley. I can't beat that. Now Socrates is, he's a good second. Or I was thinking, I had the absolute pleasure to have dinner with John Charnley and with Vernon Luck, who was the head of my hospital when I was doing my residency, was a good friend of Charnley's. Invited him over and invited me to go to dinner with him. Well, my gosh, the king of the English total hip orthopedics at the time, Sir John Charnley. But when I have dinner with Burkhardt and Esch, I get as much of a thrill out of that as I did with John Charnley. And I'm more of a contemporary guy, and I can't beat that. Of course, our wives as well. Patty and Nora and my wife Annie, my gosh, you can't have a better evening than that.
Dr. Snyder brought up Dr. Charnley. So Dr. Charnley had a vision of arthroplasty that I trained when there wasn't arthroplasty, so I was happy to put people in traction. And I actually went into orthopedics because I didn't like surgery and holding retractors. And then Charnley comes out with his total joint. And not only that, all his acetabulum failed. The Teflon just broke, and he somehow persisted on. You wonder where he would be if that was in dealing with our Food and Drug Administration today, when all your initial Teflon glenoids fall apart. But he persisted, and what we have in the arthroplasty world today is basically metal on plastic.
Yeah.
It hasn't really changed since 1970.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've certainly been an example of persistence. Editor's note, 42 years. So I've got San Diego shoulder course by 3 years. I'm 45, 42 years of shoulder education.
Yeah.
What an incredible feat. It is truly such an honor to have two giants in the field here to talk about it, to relive the glory days. And from the bottom of our hearts, we just want to thank you for everything you've invested in this community. It's been so meaningful to myself and to Peter, and really the legacy will continue to live on. So thank you for being our guest on the podcast.
Yeah, but can I thank you guys for going a step beyond what we were able to do? We had a course that we did for a few days every year, and you guys are using your talents and the modern technology that you've become expert at to take ideas, historical and futuristic, and share them with the world without any recompense. You do it because you've got that spark of education and goodness, and I want to thank you guys. I mean, I don't know how often people send you love notes, but you'll get one from me.
Well, thanks for being our guests. It's truly an honor for us to have both of you, and the stories you shared are precious to us. So the ability we have to take those stories and share them with the membership of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeon Society is truly an honor.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's about all the time we have today.
You ran out of
And
batteries. No.
I want to know if you're from a long line of people that steal pens. These are the best pens that I've ever found. I had some of these on my desk now. I had about 5 one year, and they still work.
For the listeners, we're seated at the Hotel del Coronado, and they've kindly provided us with pads and pens, and I think the pens are all going to disappear. So that's great.
Yeah.
Take us home, Brian.
Yeah, I guess that's all the time we have for our shoulder and elbow listeners out there. Don't forget to subscribe. And for Peter Chalmers, I'm Brian Waterman. We'll catch you on the next episode.